Hello, everybody. Great welcome to our international friends and welcome to our German friends as well. This is the first session of Azure Stack HCI Show held in English language. And Manfred is part of the Azure Stack HCI Show as well. And we are doing this for around about 2 years, Manfred.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, nearly 2 years. And it's show number 46 when we look at the whole series of the Azure Stack HCI show. And starting with the last show, we decided to switch to English language because we realized that many of you are watching the content live or on demand with a subtitle in different languages. And so the idea was to use the initial international English language to have more reach, because it's a very important topic we are talking about in this show.
Yeah, and the good thing for those attending live is that you can raise your questions via the chat function in YouTube, for example. So we invite you to raise your questions and we try to answer them immediately in our Azure Stack HCI show. So in round about 1 month, there is the Microsoft Ignite, and we expect to have a lot of announcement at Ignite, and we are happy to talk about all these announcements in the coming shows. But until Ignite, we have 3 more Azure Stack HCI shows, and we want to repeat some things we already provided in the German version for our international friends. So today's show is the Azure Stack HCI basics topic. So we are talking about basics. What is Azure Stack HCI? What is Azure Arc? What is the Windows Admin Center? What is it good for? And so on. We're talking about licensing. And let's start with our today's topic, the Azure Stack HCI basic. So first of all, we invite you to follow us. So please follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube. On YouTube and LinkedIn, you will find the Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk platform. So if you follow us, you will get all the news you need around Azure Hybrid Technologies. And this is the platform we communicate via text and video. So please follow us and we will stay in contact. Yeah, talking about Azure Stack HCI includes talking about Azure as well. So the strategy of Microsoft in the past was to provide a platform where every company all across the world can get compute power if they need it, can get services, and this platform is called Azure. And of course, we invested a lot in Azure services, Azure platform, and so on. But in the meantime, we realized that most of our customers stay on premises as well. So they are going the hybrid way. And there are some studies saying that almost all our customers will keep in a hybrid environment. So they want to keep their on-premises infrastructure, and some of them or most of them want to have a multi-cloud strategy. So they are at Azure, but they are using alternative cloud solutions as well. So for them, it's super important that they have a solution that is combining everything, and there are a lot of links between these solutions. And from the Microsoft perspective, of course, we focus on Azure. We continue doing that, but we are changing the strategy, not bringing everyone to Azure only, but bringing Azure to our customers where they are, in disconnected scenarios, in their data centers, or in the edge. Yeah, Manfred, you are doing Microsoft business for a long time. So what is your experience with that Microsoft strategy?
Yeah, so it's great, because the interesting thing is exactly what you mentioned, that there are different customers with different needs. But when we are talking about Azure, most of the customers like the management experience we have in Azure. We have a nice web-based portal. It's reachable worldwide. It's easy to handle. It provides rich services. And the idea in this hybrid strategy is that I can take advantage of this Azure management everywhere in the scenarios you describe. And what we exactly have today is already very, very helpful in the daily business for modern environments, to manage these environments and to use additional services we only had in Azure in the past.
Yeah, talking about the services. So Azure Arc, for example, is a very important technology Microsoft is offering customers to connect their non-Azure infrastructure with the Azure portal. So with Azure Arc, you have two options to use. So one is the Azure Arc enabled infrastructure. Azure Arc enabled infrastructure brings your own data center, your edge environment or your multi-cloud to the Azure portal. And with the Azure Arc enabled services, you can bring Azure services to your non-Azure infrastructure. So on this page, you can see how this works and how Azure Arc brings additional benefits to our Azure customers. So you can see on that slide that customer has the control plane Manfred talked about. So you have one very powerful control plane where you see all your inventory. You can see your organization. You can see how secure your environment is, because you can use security features, monitoring features, and so on from Azure. But in the past, everything was linked to the Azure region, so to the Azure data centers itself. So you can deploy servers, containers, so Kubernetes clusters, databases, and so on. But everything ran in Azure data centers. But with Azure Arc, now you are able to include your infrastructure outside of Azure into the control plane of Azure, and you are able to use services that are Azure-based, not only for your Azure infrastructure, but also for the infrastructure outside of Azure. And this is changing the options for our customers significantly, correct, Manfred?
Yeah, absolutely. Because with the Azure Arc integration and the usage of these additional services, we can exactly solve issues we had in the past, where we had to decide to use on-premises or cloud and maybe connect these services to each other, but not to have the ability to use cloud services on premises or to use the cloud portal to manage on-premises infrastructure. And this is solved by Azure Arc, where we can bring our local systems, and Azure Stack HCI is Arc enabled by default, to the Azure portal. We will see this in one of the next shows, in some live demos we will provide there, where you really can see your on-premises infrastructure inside the Azure data center.
Yeah, and the good thing about Azure Arc is that you can not only include Windows Server, but also Linux VMs, for example. And the question now is, why is there an Azure Stack HCI? So this Azure Arc technology is working with or without Azure Stack HCI. So what is the benefit of Azure Stack HCI for our customers, and what is the role? And to answer that question, we have to look at two different perspectives. So one is the HCI part in Azure Stack HCI. So most of our customers are interested in a hyper-converged infrastructure. So years ago, everyone wanted to virtualize their environment, and this is state of the art today. And the hyper-converged infrastructure is the modern way to provide server infrastructures in companies today. So Manfred, what is the difference between a three-tier infrastructure we had in the past and an HCI infrastructure customers want to have today?
Yeah, in the three-tier infrastructure, we were focused on the hardware. So as we can see in your graphic, we have a SAN system. This is a specific hardware from a vendor A, B, or C. we had the focus on storage fabric switches, on network appliances, so always hardware orientated. And with the hyperconverged infrastructure, we have the advantage that we are using industry standard technology. As we can see in the HCI stack, there is no SAN system, there is no storage fabric switch. There are industry standard servers with industry standard storage, memory, compute in there. There's some network connectivity, and the storage, compute, and network virtualization is provided by a powerful software stack. And this software stack is available at Microsoft with Storage Spaces Direct, which is the technology behind the software-defined storage, Hyper-V for the compute virtualization, and software-defined networking for the networking part. So the Microsoft technologies for the HCI stack are Storage Spaces Direct, or we often say S2D. Hyper-V, I think this is well known. This is the hypervisor from Microsoft, and SDN for software-defined networking, which is optional. So it depends on your scenario if you will use this. So advantage of this industry standard technologies is that we can scale very easy. We have newest and latest technologies very early in the market, because as soon as a hardware vendor releases a new technology, for example, new bus system, a new network connectivity, we can use this in this industry standard servers. And usually it's very affordable because we have no special hardware chassis. We don't have special connectors there. It's all the standard we use in every server with some specific configurations.
Yeah, and Microsoft HCI storage technology is called Storage Spaces Direct, and this has been awarded 2 times by the Storage Review magazine in 2019 and 2021 as the best performant, easiest to deploy, and so on solution in a mid-market solution. So when you want to have hyper-converged infrastructure, Storage Spaces Direct is a very good solution. It's not brand new. So this is something we have since Windows Server 2016. And it's still part of Windows Server, not only part of Azure Stack HCI, but in Windows Server, it's only included in the Data Center Edition. And with Windows Server, you have new releases every 3 years. With Azure Stack HCI, you have new releases every year because Azure Stack HCI is a subscription. And so this brings some additional benefits we are going to talk about today. Because very important is that Azure Stack HCI is a new operating system from Microsoft. So we have Windows Server and we have Azure Stack HCI. So what do they have in common and what are the differences? So both are operating systems. Both are including Hyper-V. But in Windows Server, the Hyper-V is a release for the next 3 years. In Azure Stack HCI, we can bring additional features more often. Windows Server is optimized for the guest operating system, but can be used for the host as well, of course, because it includes Hyper-V. Azure Stack HCI is absolutely optimized for the host. So it's not meant to run in a virtual machine. It's a host operating system. And all the new functionalities will land in Azure Stack HCI immediately and maybe later in the next version with Windows Server. So there's no guarantee for that, but in Azure Stack HCI, you have the latest and greatest. So one of the examples is GPU pooling and GPU partitioning. This is a feature we are missing in Hyper-V Windows Server on premises. So we did not have that in the past, but in Azure Stack HCI, we got this. This year or last year, I think pooling last year and partitioning this year. And now we have features our customers want to have on Hyper-V as well. Now it's included in Azure Stack HCI. So maybe it will come in Windows Server in the next generation. No one really knows, but in Azure Stack HCI, you have it right now. So for those who want to have the latest and greatest features from Microsoft in their host operating system immediately, Azure Stack HCI is the best choice. There's something you want to add, Manfred?
No, you're absolutely right. And the advantage is this 1 year release cycle. So if you are wondering how you get these new releases from the technical perspective, is a very easy design process. So these new versions are published by Microsoft. And as Sven mentioned, you are a subscriber of Azure Stack HCI. So the new version is included in your subscription. And the installation is done via a feature. It's called cluster aware updating. So your Azure Stack HCI cluster, which is configurable with minimum 1 node and maximum 16 nodes, will be patched automatically. And depending on your configuration, you have no or nearly no downtime for the update process. So it's comparable, if you are not familiar with Azure Stack HCI, with what we have in the client operating systems, where we get new versions every year and where the installation is handled more or less automatically. So you have a restart and then your services are on the latest version. Yeah.
Perfect. So there are some benefits for Azure Stack HCI. Otherwise, it would not make sense to go with a new operating system only because you have the latest and greatest features a little bit earlier. Of course, there are some benefits. And these are the Azure benefits in Azure Stack HCI. And let's talk about these right now. So one of these benefits is the Windows Server Azure Edition. So we have Windows Server, everyone knows Windows Server, but the Azure Edition is not really known by a lot of people. The Azure Edition is a special edition of Windows Server that is only available on Azure and on Azure Stack HCI, because Azure Stack HCI is a kind of Azure, but in your own premises. So the Azure Edition has additional features you will not have on your normal Windows Server, like hot patching. So Manfred, what is hot patching?
Hot patching is a technology, you all know how it works. If you update a Windows machine, doesn't matter if it's a client or it's a server, we have a restart, and depending on your hardware and power on self-test, this takes a while till the machine is back. Usually on a client OS, it's a little bit faster because the power on self-test of the client hardware has a smaller footprint. On the server, it takes longer. And with this hot patching feature in Windows Server Azure Edition, we have the advantage that we don't have a full restart of the server hardware. We only partially reload Windows components, and so you have the situation that you can install Windows updates, and now it's also released in the GUI version. In the past, we had it in Windows Server Azure Edition in a server core installation. Now we also have it with graphical user interface. You have an absolute minimized downtime when you install updates and partially restart your machines. Yeah.
Another benefit is the Azure Update Manager. So there has been an announcement last week that Azure Update Manager in the current version is general available. So this is not a feature that is only available on Azure Stack HCI, but there's a benefit with Azure Stack HCI because there is no additional cost for customers using Azure Update Manager for VMs running on Azure Stack HCI. So for every VM, Linux or Windows Server, outside of Azure or Azure Stack HCI, you have to pay $5 per server per month. But if you use Azure Update Manager on your Azure Stack HCI environment, it's for free. And this is an additional benefit for our customers using Azure Stack HCI on their host. Then we have the extended security update. This is a very, very nice thing I like. Manfred, what is extended security update, and what or what happened on October 10th, so 3 days ago?
3 days ago, yeah. So for each operating system and also application at Microsoft, we have a support life cycle. So when the product is released, we also get the information about the product life cycle. And Windows Server has a typical service life cycle of 10 years for the versions we actually have in the market. And these 10 years are split in 5 years mainstream support. These are the first 5 years, and then 5 years additional extended support. But after 10 years, the included support in the product life cycle ends. And Windows Server 2012 R2 had the end of support date. This means end of extended support on 10th of October, so 3 days ago. This means we don't receive any security updates, hot fixes, and things like this anymore for Windows Server 2012 R2. Except there are some customers, they invest in extended security updates. And with extended security updates, we can enhance the support life cycle, typically for 3 years. With Windows Server 2008 R2, there was a special commitment for some specific situations where we had 4 years extended support option. And there are different ways to receive this extended security updates. One option is to move the workload to a Microsoft Azure data center. And this is a great opportunity, but my argument is usually that the customer that is running on these old Windows Server operating systems is usually not the customer that is ready for migrating his workload to Azure. And here comes the big advantage of Azure Stack HCI, because if we move our workload to Azure Stack HCI, the workload sees an Azure platform. It's an Azure platform we run on premises, but it is Azure where it runs. And so we have the reason that we'll receive extended security updates without additional costs on Azure Stack HCI. For sure, we have to pay for the Azure Stack HCI operating system itself, but the extended security updates are included for workloads we move to Azure Stack HCI, for example, for Windows Server, but also for SQL Server, where we had the end of support already in July for the SQL Server 2012 version. Yeah.
And one more benefit is the Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI. So we are talking about this for around about 1.5 or 2 years, and everyone is waiting for general availability. We have Preview 1, we have Preview 2, and now we are waiting for Ignite, and everyone hopes that now at Ignite this November, we will announce the GA date of Azure Virtual Desktop and the pricing. So crossing our fingers, hopefully it will happen. At the moment, we cannot talk about it. But if it will be announced, what will Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI bring our customers on additional benefits, Manfred? Why are customers waiting for it so much?
Yeah, so when we are thinking about Azure Virtual Desktop, we are using for remote working technology, and there are different options. Many customers know remote desktop services or third-party tools that use technologies like remote desktop services, where we have a desktop or application that is installed remotely, and we can use it locally via a browser, via an app, or something like this. The small disadvantage of remote desktop services is that we have a server operating system there. So when we are running traditional remote desktop services, today we have Windows Server 2022, it looks different than the client operating system. Till February of this year, we also had the issue that Windows Server 2022 didn't support the Microsoft 365 apps. This is solved now. Since February, we have the support for Microsoft 365 apps in RDS scenarios. But now comes a new challenge. Since a few weeks, we are speaking about Microsoft Copilot for Windows 11. And Microsoft Copilot for Windows 11 is a Windows client operating system feature. and not a server OS feature. So the customers are still looking for a client operating system in remote working scenarios. And for sure, we can use Windows Server to host client OSs, but regarding the technical impact we have and the licensing, it's a very cost-intensive way to provide remote desktops. And the interesting thing at Azure Stack HCI and Azure Virtual Desktop is that in Azure Virtual Desktop, we are absolutely flexible with the remote OS. We can use Windows Server if we prefer this, but we can also use Windows Client. And we have a unique thing there in Azure Virtual Desktop. This is Windows Client with multi-session capability. This means that we have a target OS that is not able to provide only one remote session, but it's able to provide several sessions. And it's not only a question about technical possibilities, it's also a question of licensing. And only this Windows 11 multi-session edition we have for Azure Virtual Desktop in the Azure data centers is allowed regarding the licensing perspective to provide several parallel sessions, so these multi-sessions. And the advantage is when we use a client OS for these remote scenarios, we have continuous Microsoft 365 app support. Yes, we have it also today in the server, but we don't have any dependencies on life cycles, because I always explain it that it's difficult for Microsoft to handle this 10-year life cycle support we have with Windows Server with a modern life cycle app like we have it with Microsoft 365. So it's much easier to use a client OS where we have a yearly release cycle. And in the future, we will have the situation about the Microsoft Copilot things. So the AI integration, we have it in the client OS for the remote desktops. And so more and more customers are looking for a client OS for these remote scenarios. And with Azure Virtual Desktop, we have a solution for it. I'm often asked about this, what you mentioned, Sven, why it's not available on Azure Stack HCI. And my answer is always, from the technical perspective, it works great. I implemented this several times. And from a technical perspective, there are no issues, and there can be no issues, because Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI does the same thing we have with Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure, with the only difference that the operating system runs on our Azure Stack HCI cluster, and it's connected to Azure via an agent, and it's the same agent we have in Azure. So in Azure it works, it's released on premise, it works, but we don't have a pricing today, and I think this is the issue. We need the pricing to be sure what the cost for this implementation will be. Yeah.
And what I hear from partners and customers that are testing Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI is that, for example, the deployment could be a little bit easier and so on. And this is what I hear, that the next version of Azure Stack HCI will have a lot of improvements about deployment management directly from the cloud. So we will see what's coming at Ignite. And I think then the product will be much easier to implement. And so let's wait for what's coming. And this is exactly what the strategy behind Azure Stack HCI is. So at the beginning, we have seen the slide where we said Microsoft wants to bring Azure to where the customers are. So we had the data centers and we had the edge. So for the data centers, of course, we have some benefits like the Azure Virtual Desktop. This is usually running in a data center, or the extended security updates. Customers using this usually have these old OSs in their data centers. But there is a new opportunity for all our partners to sell Windows Server infrastructure to our customers into the edge. These are sites where usually is no or a low IT footprint. So think about retail, think about manufacturing and things like that. And this is getting more and more digitalized. And the idea of Azure Stack HCI is to bring the needed IT into all these edge environments to connect to Azure. and to bring the best from Azure to the edge, to do what's needed in the edge, and to transfer the needed data then to Azure, for example, to put it into a data center and to do some analytics and so on and so on. And therefore, we need a lot of technologies like Azure Stack HCI for the hardware. Then we need Azure Arc as the bridge from the Azure Stack HCI to Azure. And we need Windows Admin Center. And Windows Admin Center is something we will talk about in the next Azure Stack HCI show. It's the graphical user interface we will use for Azure Stack HCI, because Azure Stack HCI does not have its own graphical user interface. And Windows Admin Center is a very powerful tool. And we will have some demos today in 2 weeks. And Manfred, I think you're super happy to show all our partners and customers outside what Windows Admin Center can do.
Absolutely. I'm using Windows Admin Center since the first version, because we also can use it for Windows Server management. So we had Windows Admin Center before we had Azure Stack HCI. And today, Windows Admin Center is a very powerful management tool for Azure Stack HCI, but there are different tools. I think in the session where we talk about Windows Admin Center, we will also talk about these tools so that you can see what's the best tool or service for your specific needs. And so we will focus on Windows Admin Center, but also provide you insights about the other tools Microsoft provides for Azure Stack HCI management.
Yeah, and on this slide, you can see the Azure Stack HCI architecture. So you can see that, of course, there's a hardware, but on top of the hardware, it's the host operating system, Azure Stack HCI, with all the storage spaces direct included, the Hyper-V features, and so on. And on top of it, you have Windows Server or Linux VMs on the left side, and on the right side, you have Azure Kubernetes services. Together with Azure Arc, you can run containers or Azure Arc-enabled services on this container infrastructure. And on the classic VMs, of course, you can run your workloads like Exchange, SQL, or things like that. So you can do the old world with the VMs and the new world with all the containerized solutions and the Azure Arc-enabled services on one platform. So it's a very flexible platform for everything you want to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good. And yeah, hardware is super important for Azure Stack HCI as well. So Microsoft is not providing hardware. So here our OEMs are getting super relevant because they are providing server hardware Azure Stack HCI is running on, but not every hardware is recommended. The reason for that is that Azure Stack HCI is a subscription. So you get new features, very often updates, and so on. And you want to have a guarantee that your Azure Stack HCI is running on the hardware after the update. And to have this guarantee, Microsoft has to work very closely with the hardware partners that they are providing all the needed software updates for their hardware, that Azure Stack HCI continues working together with the hardware. And this is the reason why we certify hardware for Azure Stack HCI. And there is a catalog and sizer. You can find it in the World Wide Web. And there you can see all the hardware vendors that are offering Azure Stack HCI hardware. And you can use some filters because there are different form factors. There are some hardware only available in some regions, for example. And we have the classification about the type of certification. We have validated nodes and integrated nodes. So Manfred, what is the difference between the validated and integrated system?
Yeah, the base testing is the same. So both validated nodes and integrated systems are hardware machines, are industry standard servers that are tested based on a standardized testing process provided by Microsoft. So you can be sure that Azure Stack HCI runs on both of them. The testing process, it's the so-called private cloud simulator, is a standardized thing. This private cloud simulator runs about 5 days. So it's not a small test where you say, okay, it's another label. It's a really intense test of the hardware. The difference is that the validated node is tested once, and then it's in the catalog. And as you know, the hardware evolves via the years. So we have new drivers, we have new firmwares. And for sure, you can also know and use these new drivers and firmwares for the validated nodes, but you don't get this information from your OEM. The OEM provides a solution that was configured, is running, you can use this. But in the integrated systems, you will also receive driver updates, firmware updates via a standardized integrated process from your OEM, from your hardware vendor. And this is a big advantage in the field when you don't have to think, oh, which driver should I take? Which firmware should I take? But if this is integrated in this cluster-aware updating process I mentioned, the cluster-aware updating process can be used for new versions, but also for monthly updates on this cluster. So integrated system, like the name says, it's not only the hardware on the one side and the software on the other side that's brought together. It's a process where we have also provided this firmware and driver updates within the Microsoft update process. And the integrated systems usually have an Azure Stack HCI pre-installed. This is not a big advantage because the installation of Azure Stack HCI is very easy. But especially for these customers that give feedback, like Sven mentioned from Azure Virtual Desktop, that the deployment could be easier. The deployment in integrated systems is very easy because the OS is pre-installed, and the integrated systems provide an extension for the Windows Admin Center. We talked about Windows Admin Center a few minutes ago, and the Windows Admin Center is usually for the host OS management. But on integrated systems, we can also see and manage hardware-specific parameters. So this is the main difference here.
Yeah, and last week, Microsoft announced a third certification status. It's the Premier Solution. So this is called the Best HCI Experience. So Dell is the first vendor offering a Premier solution. And I think after Ignite latest, we will talk a little bit more about these Premier solutions and what the big difference is. But for now, if you visit our LinkedIn channel, so the Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk LinkedIn channel, you see 1 or 2 posts about the new Premier solution. So if you're interested to get more information about that, please visit our LinkedIn channel. So let's talk a little bit about licensing, because licensing is something we receive a lot of questions about. And Azure Stack HCI, of course, is a product that's not for free. And the licensing is super simple. There are some options, and let's start with the normal option to buy Azure Stack HCI as a subscription. So Azure Stack HCI is something that's generating Azure consumed revenue. So there's no specific product you can purchase or buy. If you want to use Azure Stack HCI, you need an Azure subscription, for example, through your cloud solution provider, CSP, and then you have access to Azure services. And if you use Azure Stack HCI, you get billed for that on a monthly basis as part of your Azure subscription. And the cost for Azure Stack HCI is $10 per physical core per month. But the difference between the Azure Stack HCI licensing and the Windows Server licensing is that Azure Stack HCI is charging only the physical cores that are visible for Azure. So for example, if you deactivate some cores because you do not need them for a specific time period, you will not get charged for that. So very similar to your experience on Azure, you pay for what you use. Something to add, Manfred?
Only that this is already adopted by several OEMs in the market that provide special tools for their servers to dynamically change the amount of active cores to take advantage of this pricing model. So for sure, if we change the number of active cores, we need a restart for the server. But as you know, in a cluster, this restart can be handled without downtime for the workload, because we can move the resources before we restart the server. And so several OEMs provide extensions for Windows Admin Center where you can select how many active cores you need. And then this is changed in the host or operating systems. This is a big advantage if you have here situations where you need more resources, and when you have situations where you can reduce the amount of cores to reduce your costs.
Yeah, and if you ask yourself now, why should I pay for the host operating system as Hyper-V in Windows Server is for free for the host? Well, if you're using VMware, for example, with some features like the GPU pooling and partitioning, it's not for free as well. And of course, you can use Windows Server Hyper-V for free, but then you do not get the Azure benefits we talked about some minutes ago. So like extended security updates for free, the Azure Update Manager for free. You're not able to use the Azure edition of Windows Server on your Windows Server infrastructure. And you're not able to use Azure Virtual Desktop on a Windows Server or any other platform outside of Azure Stack HCI. So you pay for the latest and greatest features in Hyper-V, in Storage Spaces Direct, and for the Azure Hybrid benefits. In addition to that, of course, you have to pay for the guest operating system. This is a question I receive very often. How about the licensing of the guest operating system? And the answer is very simple. Nothing is changing. No matter if you have Azure Stack HCI on your host, Hyper-V on your host, VMware on your host, or any other platform, you have to license your guest operating systems the same way. If your guest operating system is Linux-based, Microsoft has nothing to do with that licensing. If you run some virtual machines, then you can license your Windows Server hardware with a standard license. And with every licensing of the full hardware, you get 2 VM rights for Windows Server guest operating systems. You can add more standard licenses to get more VM rights. And if you have a lot of VM usage for Windows Server, the Data Center edition is the best choice. So there's nothing changing between the licensing of the guest operating system in the old Hyper-V world or the new Azure Stack HCI world. So everything keeps to be the same. Anything to add from your side, Manfred?
No, absolutely the situation, yeah.
Perfect. So there's a second opportunity for you to license Azure Stack HCI. And this has been announced last year at Ignite, the Azure Hybrid benefits. This has nothing to do with the Azure benefits. So the Azure benefits are some features you can use on Azure Stack HCI if you pay for Azure Stack HCI. The Azure Hybrid benefits is some benefits that come with your Windows Server Data Center Software Assurance license or your Windows Server Data Center subscription. If you have Windows Server Software Assurance, Data Center Edition, or a subscription, then you have the Azure Hybrid benefits. And these Azure Hybrid benefits bring some benefits for Azure Stack HCI as well. So one of the benefits, for example, is that you can use AKS, so Azure Kubernetes Services, for free or with no additional cost. But this is true for Windows Server as well, so it does not have to be Azure Stack HCI. Or there's another benefit coming with Azure Hybrid benefits that you can use additional VMs in Azure, and you can run Windows Server in these VMs, but you do not have to pay for a Windows Server in these VMs, as you can use the Azure Hybrid benefit, let's say dual usage with the data center license. So if you have 16 cores software assurance, for example, you can use 16 cores VMs in Azure Stack HCI with Windows Server without paying for Windows Server. So this brings you a huge benefit. But the most relevant benefit for Azure Stack HCI is that you can use Azure Stack HCI without any cost. So if you have data center software assurance licenses, for example, 72 cores, and you have a 3-node Azure Stack HCI cluster with 24 cores each, then you have 72 cores all up. If you have 72 cores Windows Server Data Center plus software assurance, you can assign these licenses to the new Azure Stack HCI environment, and then you do not have to pay the $10 per physical core if you activate the Azure Hybrid benefit. And I will show you in a minute how this works. And in addition to that, you can use your Windows Server in the guest operating system for free as well. And I will show you how this works in a minute too. So first of all, when you have your Azure Stack HCI connected with Azure through Azure Arc, and then you go to your Azure portal, you connect to Azure Stack HCI, and you go on the configuration topic, then you see that there is a segment called Azure Hybrid Benefit. So Azure Hybrid Benefit is not activated per default. You click the Activate Now button, and then on the right side, you can see what's happening if you activate your Azure Hybrid benefits and what's needed to do that. And what's needed, I already talked about that, Windows Server Data Center plus software assurance or a Windows Server Data Center subscription. And then if you activate it, the system will run and check if your Azure subscription and your software assurance is visible for Microsoft. So if there's a link between your software assurance and the subscription, if you have enterprise agreement, usually this is something that's very simple. If you have your licenses from different sources, then maybe there is a manual process needed. So if Microsoft sees that you have a subscription and a software assurance, then the activation will be automatically. If not, there will be a pop-up that Microsoft does not find your software assurance contract, and then there's an email address showing up where you can send some more information about your software assurance contract, and then Microsoft will manually enable your Azure Hybrid benefits. If this is done, then you can see that the Azure Hybrid benefit is activated. So you can see there's a green symbol activated. And below of the Azure Hybrid benefit, you can see the Windows Server subscription add-on. And this add-on is for free as well if your Azure Hybrid benefits are activated. So usually this add-on costs around about $23 per month per physical core. So it's very costly. But with the Azure Hybrid benefit, this is for free as well. And now it's important that you do exactly this, because if you change your Windows Server Data Center plus software assurance into the Azure Stack HCI cores, then you are losing the right to use the Windows Server Data Center license on your on-premises server. But with the Windows Server subscription add-on, you get back the right to use Windows Server. So, but you have to activate this button. If you're not doing this, you can use Windows Server in the guest operating system, but you're not licensed the correct way. So it's absolutely needed that you press that button as well, and then you get the Windows Server license. The good benefit is that you are not using Windows Server from your perpetual license, but you're using Windows Server out of Azure. And this Windows Server does not have to be activated. It's activated by default because it's a Windows Server from Azure, from the Azure subscription. And so that's super, super easy, isn't it, Manfred?
Absolutely, yeah. The important thing is, you mentioned it, I've seen it at several customers already. It does not know which option you want to choose. You have to actively click here, but it's only 2 clicks. If you have the licensing already done, you have the data center and the software assurance, and then activate both options, and you can use these advantages. We mentioned some of them, for example, the data center Azure edition with enhanced functionality.
Yeah, but there's one more comment I have to make, because there's an inconstant communication around the Azure hybrid benefits. So if you look at Microsoft and look for Azure hybrid benefit, Azure Stack HCI, for example, or if you go to the Azure portal and look at the comments on the right top, you can see that the official documents from Microsoft say that it's enough to have Windows Server Data Center subscription to have the Azure hybrid benefit. But if you look at the license terms, and this is the binding document for our customers, then you can see that the Azure hybrid benefit for Azure Stack HCI is available for EA, so enterprise agreement customers only. So I'm in contact with the licensing team, and I asked them to change the license terms or to change the documentation because it's not matching. So at the moment, if you want to be from the legal perspective on the right side, you only can activate the Azure hybrid benefits if you have an enterprise agreement, but it will work as well if you have a software assurance from any other source. And in the license terms, you can see that CSP customers can use Azure hybrid benefits as well. So this is not correct too, because through CSP, you get the Windows Server Data Center subscription because that's needed, but you can purchase Windows Server Data Center as a perpetual license as well. And this is not documented in the license terms correctly. So we will see if and how fast our license team will change this. But from the technical perspective, you can activate the Azure hybrid benefits if you have software assurance for Windows Server Data Center, or if you have a Windows Server subscription from the CSP channel.
And I have a different view on this, Sven. Sorry to mention this. So I'm not Microsoft, but there are in the European region, there are some laws also for Microsoft. And when you follow the process in the Azure portal, you are nowhere forced to read the license terms. Yeah, we know there are the license terms, but for a customer, regarding the laws, it's required that they get all the information in the purchase process. And the Azure portal says you need data center and software assurance, and you can go through this process. And if you imagine you don't have the background we to have, but I'm the customer and I see, oh, I want to choose this option, I get only the information you had on your screenshot that I need data center and software assurance. We don't have the information, please go to the license terms. And when you would click on learn more, it's not possible in the screenshot. You will be directed to the learn page, not to the license page. And on the learn page, we also have the information that it's Azure Stack HCI. That is only for EA customers. It's also for data center and software assurance. And we don't have any notes about the channel. So if you want to be sure talk to your lawyers, ensure yourself. But I think we are safe here, especially in the European market. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we agree that it would be easier if we have a consistent
Absolutely. Yeah.
communication through all the channels, because on the Azure portal, you only see the software assurance. There's no comment about subscriptions. On the learn.microsoft, subscriptions are included. And in the license terms, everything is excluded, but the enterprise agreement customers. So this is a little bit confusing, but I think if it's working and you get activated, then you should be on the safe side. So software assurance should be fine. But as Manfred already mentioned, ask your local lawyer, and hopefully they will support you. And I will try to get more clarity on all our communication documents as soon as possible. So that's it for today. The next show, Azure Stack HCI Show, will be on October 27th, same time, Friday, 12 to 1. And now we want to say goodbye to our international guests, because the last 5 minutes we want to switch to German language, and we want to present some events and on-screen shows Manfred is providing over the next couple of days. And so we switch now to German and say goodbye to our English friends. Hopefully we will see you in 14 days. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ja, und somit sind wir wieder im Deutschen zurück und möchten einfach nochmal auf ein paar schöne Veranstaltungen hinweisen. Da haben wir auf jeden Fall den Hybrid-Event. Wir haben es ja schon öfter erwähnt, dass diese Konferenz am 29. und 30. November in Würzburg unmittelbar nach der Ignite stattfindet. Das heißt, an diesen 2 Tagen wird Manfred zusammen mit all seinen Gästen, ich werde auf jeden Fall auch da sein, über all die News rund um die Ignite sprechen, ganz, ganz viele Live-Demos machen. Das heißt, wenn ihr aus erster Hand dann sehen wollt, wie sich das neue Azure Stack HCI anfühlt, dann ist auf jeden Fall dieser Hybrid-Event für euch genau das Richtige. Und ihr seht ja hier auch den Link manfredhelber.de/hybrid-Konferenz. Da habt ihr die Möglichkeit, euch die Agenda anzuschauen, und ihr habt auch die Möglichkeit, euch dort anzumelden. Also würde mich freuen, wenn wir uns dort sehen. Egal, ob ihr Partner oder Endkunde seid, ist diese Veranstaltung für euch offen. Naja, und dann ist der Manfred heute ja wie immer nach der Azure Stack HCI Show nochmal zu sehen um 14 Uhr mit dem MVP Erik Berg. Heute sprecht ihr in der Hybrid Show über welches Thema, Manfred?
Heute sprechen wir mal über die Basics, also how to get started with Azure and Hybrid Services. Titel ist in Englisch, aber wir werden die Show auf Deutsch machen.
Das habe ich mich vorhin auch gefragt, als ich diese Folie geupdatet habe, ob ihr jetzt auch ins Englische switcht.
Nein, tun wir noch nicht, es sei denn, das ist ein großer Demand da. Also wir bleiben dabei deutschsprachigen, aber wir werden da ganz viel gefragt, so nach den Basics. Also wir haben uns auch über die Zeit entwickelt. Wir machen das ja auch schon ein bisschen länger und sind deswegen jetzt immer so bei den höherwertigen Diensten, sage ich mal, wo wir dann aber die Basics als bekannt voraussetzen. Und da hatten wir gesagt, starten wir nochmal so mit den Grundlagen. Wie fange ich überhaupt an, wenn ich sowas noch gar nicht habe, wenn ich vielleicht noch nie mit Azure gearbeitet habe? Ja.
Genau, dann haben wir ja noch den Alexander Orter, mit dem du die Azure Arc Show machst. Da steht zumindest schon mal das nächste Datum, nämlich der 23. Oktober. 16 Uhr ist die Zeit. Das Thema habt ihr euch noch nicht überlegt. Da werdet ihr dann relativ kurzfristig mit um die Ecke kommen.
Genau, es gibt verschiedene Optionen. Also wir haben jetzt auch das letzte Mal nochmal über Extended Security Updates gesprochen, weil es da eine neue Entwicklung gab, und das halten wir uns immer so ein bisschen offen, dass wir da reagieren können. Es gibt ja immer News am Anfang und so ein zentrales Thema, und das werden wir noch kommunizieren. Genau.
Gut, ansonsten hast du ja auch mit dem Carsten Rachfal immer die On-Prem-Show. Die haben wir jetzt eine Weile nicht gehabt, weil ihr nämlich anderweitig permanent unterwegs seid. Ihr hattet ja den Hyper-V-Workshop vor
So ist es.
einigen Wochen und jetzt nächste Woche den dreitägigen HCI-Workshop. Ja, da seid ihr 3 Tage online und geht in die Tiefe rein. Da kann man sich auch noch anmelden, oder?
Genau, kann man sich noch anmelden und es ist ein Demo-Workshop, wie wir das Ganze nennen. Das heißt, wir gehen ganz intensiv in Live-Demos rein, um quasi von der Basis, was brauche ich so alles für HCI, bis hin zum Deployment und Betrieb uns das anzuschauen. Und zwar in beiden Varianten. Einmal in der Variante im Windows Server 2022 und zum anderen im Azure Stack HCI. Das heißt, beides werden wir dort sehen. Anmelde-URL läuft gerade unten durch und gibt es auch auf dem Slide, was Sven eingeblendet hat. Und ist online via Teams, also ist ganz unkompliziert teilzunehmen.
Ein Traum. Dann haben wir noch die WBSC Skills, natürlich auch wieder im Oktober. Diesmal geht es um Windows Server vNext oder wie du auf deiner Folie schon ergänzt hast, 2025. Man sieht ja in der nächsten Version von Windows Server in der ganzen Preview teilweise schon das 2025, wie man sehen konnte. Von daher vermuten wir mal, dass es auch so heißt. Würde ja Sinn machen, dass das der Name des neuen Betriebssystems sein wird. Wir hatten schon 2 Ausgaben, und zwar am 2. und am 9. Da hast du einmal so einen gewissen Überblick gegeben und über die Active Directory Domain Services hast du Anfang dieser Woche gesprochen. Nächste Woche geht es um Hyper-V in Windows Server. Was kann man denn da erwarten beim nächsten Hyper-V?
Ja, man kann einiges erwarten. Ich kann leider am 16.10. noch nicht alles zeigen, weil ich beschränke mich auf das, was wirklich in der Preview drin ist. Aber es ist für alle schon mal, glaube ich, beruhigend. Hyper-V ist drin. Hyper-V hat ein paar neue Features bekommen, aber wir hatten es ja vorhin im englischsprachigen Teil, wo wir sagten, Azure Stack HCI hat einfach den Vorteil, das gibt es jährlich neu. Da wissen wir schon, was drin steckt. Den Windows Server VNext, den gibt es ja nicht in den nächsten Wochen. Da ist noch eine gewisse Zeit hin. Also ich rechne so mit einem Jahr auf jeden Fall. Da wird also noch das ein oder andere vielleicht an- oder ausgeschaltet oder hinzugefügt oder also da haben wir noch nicht ganz den finalen Stand, aber gerade so im Bereich der Themen Netzwerkkonfiguration und auch im Bereich des Themas GPU-Unterstützung gibt es so erste Indizien, dass sich da vielleicht ein bisschen was tut, ja.
Sehr gut, da freuen wir uns auf jeden Fall drauf auf den nächsten Server und wir freuen uns auf den nächsten WBSC Support. Der findet nämlich heute in 14 Tagen statt. Die Supportstunde sind immer 60 Minuten für eure Fragen, entweder im Vorfeld schon über LinkedIn oder E-Mail, wenn ihr habt, dem Manfred zukommen lassen oder dann eben live in der Stunde über das Chatfenster. Heute hatten wir gar keine einzige Frage, gell? Oder haben wir die irgendwie übersehen? Auf jeden Fall habt ihr
Bei
hier
uns
die
hier hatten wir
Möglichkeit.
keine Frage, ja. Vielleicht müssen wir dazu sagen, dass diejenigen, die uns aus dem deutschsprachigen Raum zuschauen und vielleicht lieber auf Deutsch schreiben, ihr könnt gerne auf Deutsch reinschreiben und wenn es ein Kommentar ist, blenden wir den einfach ein und wenn es eine Frage ist, dann übersetzen wir die gerne. Also ihr müsst nicht unbedingt auf Englisch schreiben. Im Support hatten wir ganz viele Fragen. Da hatten wir interessanterweise heute mit der YouTube-Plattform ein bisschen Probleme. Also da sagten dann alle auf LinkedIn und Twitch, wo ich ja auch rein streame, läuft's. Aber YouTube hatten wir jetzt noch nie, aber da hat es heute Morgen ein bisschen gehakt. Da hatten wir aber ganz viele Fragen. Aber da hatten dann viele auf LinkedIn einfach umgeswitcht und da ihre Fragen reingeschickt, ja.
Ja, ansonsten empfehlen wir euch natürlich, uns auch auf LinkedIn zu folgen. Manfred und mir privat, das ist sehr hilfreich. Dann haben wir noch die Azure Stack HCI Show und wir haben ja vorhin auch Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk als die neue internationale Plattform, wo ganz, ganz viel passieren wird, empfohlen. Schaut einfach, dass ihr auf dem Weg mit uns in Kontakt bleibt. Es gibt immer ganz, ganz viel zu berichten. Das große Thema ist natürlich gerade ja, die künstliche Intelligenz und was Microsoft da so vorhat in seinen Produkten. Da hat Manfred jetzt auch einen neuen LinkedIn-Channel aufgemacht zum Thema künstliche Intelligenz. Also da schaut einfach mal nach, denn auf diese Art und Weise bleibt ihr auf jeden Fall immer auf dem Laufenden. Und dann haben wir natürlich unsere YouTube-Kanäle. Der eine oder andere hat jetzt vielleicht über den Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk heute schon zugeschaut. Natürlich streamen wir weiterhin auch über Manfred und meinen privaten Channel. Wir haben da auch nach wie vor Playlists, wo wir versuchen, die Themen so ein bisschen für euch vorzufiltern, damit es euch leichter fällt, dann auch on demand den Content zu finden. Wenn ihr unseren Kanälen auf jeden Fall folgt, hat es den Vorteil, dass ihr proaktiv informiert werdet, wenn wieder irgendwie neuer Content live gestreamt wird. Also würde uns freuen, wenn ihr uns hier folgt. Ansonsten gibt es den WBSC-Kalender, den könnt ihr abonnieren. Die URL seht ihr unten, da kriegt ihr eine Anleitung, wie man den Kalender abonniert. Bitte folgt genau dieser Anleitung, damit ihr auch die Updates, die wir in den Kalender eintragen, dann entsprechend in euren Kalender integriert seht. Und wer gerne einen Newsletter von Manfred haben möchte, der kann statt Kalender auch Newsletter eintippen und hat dann die Möglichkeit, sich den WBSC Newsletter anzuschauen. Ja, somit wären wir am Ende unserer heutigen bilingualen Sendung. Es hat uns viel Spaß gemacht, wie immer. Ich hoffe, für diejenigen, die schon öfter dabei waren, war es trotzdem auch spannend, sich die Basics nochmal reinzuziehen. Es dauert ja manchmal doch ein bisschen häufiger, bis man alles im Detail verstanden hat. Auch ich lerne jedes Mal wieder was dazu. Und von daher war es für mich auch schön, heute, Manfred, wieder diese Stunde mit dir zu verbringen. Ich sage an der Stelle wieder Tschüss. Die letzten Worte gehören wie immer dem Manfred. Ein schönes Wochenende.
Ja, dem schließe ich mich fast an. Wir sind auch schon ein bisschen über der Zeit, aber anscheinend hat sich dann jetzt doch noch jemand getraut, eine Frage reinzuschicken. Also ich sagte, ihr könnt gerne auch auf Deutsch schreiben und wir schaffen es nicht mehr, das in der Tiefe zu beantworten. Vielleicht das nächste Mal nochmal oder vielleicht ist es ja für dich eine Option, dir den HCI-Workshop anzuschauen. Aber die Aussage Windows Server 2022 mit S2D geht natürlich mit 2 Knoten. Man muss da nicht mit 3 Knoten starten. Es gibt aber eine spezielle Sache, die nur mit Azure Stack HCI geht, nämlich das Single Node Cluster. Das ist Azure Stack HCI exklusiv, aber das mit 2 Knoten zu arbeiten und zu starten, geht mit Windows Server 2022. Genauso geht es sehr gut. Man muss die Dinge richtig machen, dass gut funktioniert. Und wie gesagt, vielleicht klappt es ja nächste Woche zum Workshop oder in einer der nächsten Shows. Von daher sage ich jetzt auch vielen Dank. Vielleicht sehen wir uns noch zur Hybrid-Show später. Und dann wünsche ich auch ein schönes Wochenende. Und ich blende einfach zum Abschluss nochmal den Kalender ein. Bis dahin, macht's gut. Tschüss.